Prime Minister, I know that you're off to Singapore soon to deliver this keynote address at the Shangri-La Dialogue. It's widely expected to be your most substantial remarks when it comes to geopolitics and foreign policy and defence and security to date. I want to start with Senator John McCain's comments. You know, he sort of called for the US and its allies to do more when it comes to countering China in its militarisation efforts in the South China Sea. He's said specifically there should be patrols in the 12 nautical mile. Is that something that Australia would be considering?
Well, we maintain and exercise our right to freedom of navigation and overflight throughout the region, indeed, and of course, over the South China Sea. And we repeat the calls that we've made and the solidarity we've shown with other nations in the region, including the ASEAN nations, to ensure that the rule of law is complied with, that no unilateral actions are taken in the South China Sea which would exacerbate tensions, and that any territorial disputes are resolved in accordance with international law.
China has continued to aggressively build out in the area, though. Does that put Australia in a difficult situation, given how reliant we are economically and strategically when it comes to our relationship with China?
We have a very strong relationship with China. We have a very strong, rock-solid alliance with the United States. It's the bedrock of our whole national security.
Do you
but I just may say this to you, that we will continue to maintain and exercise freedom of navigation and overflight.
Do you agree with Senator McCain's comments that China is acting more and more like a bully?
Senator McCain can speak, and very eloquently, for himself. He had a very good visit here in Australia, and we were very honoured to receive him as a very good friend of Australia. He is a wonderful advocate for ANZUS, for the Australia-US alliance. He is and has always been a great friend of Australia. As far as the relationship with China is concerned, it is important that as China rises, as its economic power grows, as its influence grows, that it does so peacefully and in a manner that respects the rights of all other countries. That is vitally important. President Xi has spoken of making sure that to avoid the Thucydides trap, and he's referring back to the great history of the war between Athens and Sparta, where the historian and general, Athenian general Thucydides, said that the real cause of the war was anxiety created by the rise of Athens, and President Xi is very aware of this. It is very important that China, which has been such an enormous beneficiary, none bigger, of the peace and stability in the Asia-Pacific region, which has seen harmony over many decades, it is vitally important that China respects that, respects the rule of law, and respects the principle that might is not right.
That sort of leads me into wanting to know more about these comments that your foreign minister made, saying that essentially China cannot continue to thrive or reach its full potential as a global player if it doesn't embrace a rules-based level of democracy. Do you think democratization is necessary?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm not agreeing. I'm not going to comment on your characterisation. I just say this to you, that respecting the rule of law, respecting the rights of other countries, their sovereign rights, in accordance with international law, is absolutely critical. We all have a vested interest in the maintenance of the rule of law in our region, and all of us have to work hard together to maintain it. And what Australia takes, the message I take to the Shangri-La Dialogue, is the commitment and the leadership we show, not as a superpower, as a middle power, as a regional power, to work with our partners in the region. The largest powers, the middle powers, everybody. In Lee Kuan Yew's words, the big fish, the small fish and the shrimps, to work with everybody to ensure that we maintain that harmony that has been the foundation of so much prosperity and human advancement over these past 4 decades and more.
Arguably, Lee Kuan Yew had a less of a challenge than President Xi does when it comes to China. But as you hinted to earlier, the rhetoric coming through from Beijing, from President Xi, he's been kind of a champion of free trade, of the new international liberal order. Is there a sense that there's a vacuum being made by the US becoming more inward-looking, retreating, essentially leaving the gap open for Beijing to take its...
I'll leave the commentary to you and your colleagues at Bloomberg. From our point of view, we believe and we know that free trade and open markets has delivered enormous prosperity to our region. Billions of people have been lifted out of poverty by the peace, the stability and the free trade, the open markets that have depended on that stability. You see, that's the foundation. That is the absolute essential. Put that at risk, and everything else is put at risk. Your economic growth is put at risk. Your political stability is put at risk. The chances of young people to get ahead and get an education is put at risk. So that peace, that stability, which has been the foundation of our prosperity in the region, that is what we must work hard to maintain. And that's why it's important that all of the nations, particularly those in the region, coming together at the Shangri-La Dialogue, recognise that, understand each other, understand their perspectives and work more closely together.
Do you support Beijing becoming a greater international power? Do you think China is ready?
Well, China is already a great power. I mean, China is a quarter of the world's population. It is the second largest economy by most measures and will shortly be the largest. By some measures, it already is the largest. China's rise has been extraordinarily rapid. I mean, it is one of the elements, one of the biggest elements, in the nature of the times in which we live. We are living in a time of change, unprecedented in its scale and pace. Think about this. 40 years ago, China was barely engaged in the global economy. And then Deng Xiaoping went south and he opened up China to the world, began that process. And remember when he said that the great Chinese navigator, Zheng He, when he had sailed down through the Pacific and into the Indian Ocean, in those days when China was open to the world, it was strong, and then when it closed, it became weak. And he said China must be open to the world again. That process has all taken place in the lifetimes of most of us. It has been so rapid. And of course, that is why, naturally, it can create tensions and anxieties. This is what President Xi recognises. He recognises this point when he says China must avoid the Thucydides trap. And that is why it's important for China, as it grows, as its influence grows, as its economic power grows. These are all natural developments, but what it must do is build confidence. Build confidence that as a big neighbour and a bigger neighbour, it will be a good neighbour. And that's why the confidence building, the respect for the rule of law, the respect for the sovereign rights of other countries, large and small.
Just as an example, with all the sabre-rattling from Pyongyang so far this year, is taking a more assertive stance when it comes to dealing with North Korea, with that special relationship, a timely test of how China can prove itself?
Well, the North Korea's conduct is reckless, dangerous, and becoming more so. It threatens the peace of the region. In fact, it threatens the peace of the world. China has enormous leverage over North Korea. North Korea is not a client state like East Germany was to the Soviet Union. That's true. And China has had many frustrations in its dealing with Pyongyang. But nonetheless, the fact remains that China has the greatest leverage over North Korea, and with the greatest leverage comes the greatest responsibility. So we will do our part with sanctions, of course, but we look to Beijing to bring the pressure to bear on the regime in Pyongyang to bring it to its senses, so that it ceases threatening the peace of the region with its reckless conduct.
The recent G7 Prime Minister seemed to portend something of a seismic shift when it comes to global alliances. Angela Merkel suggesting that Germany cannot continue to rely on the US, on the UK, that Europeans must take charge of their own destiny. If such an alliance that's steeped in tradition, in deep friendship, the post-war alliance can be looking so fractured at the moment, what does that mean for Australia? You say that the US and Australia have these shared values, this special relationship, but Do we really?
Well, of course we do, and our alliance is stronger than ever. The Australia-US alliance is more important than ever, as President Trump and I demonstrated when we were together on the USS Intrepid in New York only a little while ago. Our commitment, the commitment of our two nations, based on our history, based on our shared values, based on our mutual interests, is stronger than ever. You know, it is 99 years since the first time Australians and Americans went into combat together in the First World War. And in that time, in every major conflict, Australia has stood with the United States. We are the firmest of allies. Now, having said that, everyone has to pull their weight. We understand that, and we are doing it. We are bringing our defence expenditure up to 2% of GDP. Under my government, we are making the biggest investment in our defence capabilities in peacetime in our history. A massive expansion of our defence capabilities, building a whole sovereign defence industry here in Australia. So we recognise that everyone must play their part, and Australia is doing precisely that.
Is there a concern, though, that President Trump has proven himself to be irrational at times, erratic, shall we say, when it comes to policy decisions, and at other times transactional? Is that level of good faith between Australia and US something that can still be relied on?
The relationship is in the very best of health. The relationship between the United States and Australia is as strong as any relationship could be. It is based on history, shared values, common interests, the closest possible engagement at every level. Defence, political, economic, business, people to people, family. It is the closest possible relationship, and it gets stronger all the time. And as a symbol of that, as an example of that, you saw the celebration, the commemoration of the Battle of the Coral Sea on the Intrepid in New York, and of course the President and I both spoke as we honoured those old veterans of that conflict, men in their 90s who turned the hinge of fate, who saved Australia, turned the course of the Second World War when they were teenagers in the Australian and US navies serving together.
Prime Minister, I want to talk about this issue of intelligence sharing, because in light of the leaks following Manchester, in light of these reports that President Trump shared confidential information with senior Russian officials, have you sought, on behalf of Australia, assurances that intelligence shared will maintain as being classified?
Well, the intelligence relationship, as you know, between Australia and the United States is also intensely close as part of the Five Eyes arrangements. We have every confidence in the confidentiality of the intelligence we share with our friends in the United States, just as they do in the confidence we give to the intelligence they share with us. But I want to say to you that intelligence is more important than ever, and in particular in the battle against terrorism. It is a global phenomenon. The global threat of Islamist terrorism extends from Europe to the Middle East, to Asia, to the Americas, to Australia. And so the sharing of intelligence, not just between the Five Eyes, but between all nations that are committed to defeating this scourge, is more important than ever.
Have you sought assurances from President Trump?
I can assure you, we are assured, always assured, of the strongest security and the strongest confidentiality as between our intelligence services. It is a relationship of many decades standing, and one which is, again, as rock solid and part of the alliance.
President Trump has suggested that the US may withdraw from the Paris Accord on climate change. What would that mean for US leadership? What would it mean for the Paris deal?
Well, the Paris Agreement has been entered into by over 140 countries, including Australia. We are committed to it, and as I've said publicly, both recently and since last year, the United States will obviously make its own decision, but Australia will remain committed to the Paris Agreement. When we enter into international agreements, we stick with them. We are on track to meet our emissions reduction targets in accordance with the Paris Treaty, and we are committed to it.
There's always a lot of talk about these shared values in the special relationship between Australia and the United States, and you've spoken of that in this conversation. But when you take a look at a president who is against free trade, who's protectionist, who is against refugees, against multiculturalism, you could say, and against tackling climate change, what are these shared values that we have?
I don't necessarily, I don't agree with all of those premises. I mean,